Shubham, Arushi, we are live.
Okay, great. So, a very good morning to all the Karmi Yogis who are joining us today for yet another exciting webinar on the fifth day of Andaman and Nicobar State Learning Week. So, today we have Arushi Malhotra with us, who will take us through a very important topic, that is workplace well-being. Yeah, so sorry. Arushi holds a master's degree in international development from the Paris School of International Affairs, Sciences Po, and is presently working with Dalberg as a senior designer, where she combines design thinking and behavioral science to create innovative, inclusive, and scalable solutions. Before joining Dalberg, Arushi led the establishment of Behavioral Insights Unit at Niti Aayog and also played a key role in establishment of Niti Aayog's Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office, we all know as DMEO. We also have 4 courses on climate change and urban development from Dalberg on IGOT, so do check them out after this session. So without any further delay, let's dive in and hear from Arushi. How can we enhance our work culture, which could help us increase our productivity and our contribution to nation building? Arushi,
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shubham. And thank you everyone for joining on a Saturday. I'm also so excited to see that everybody is keen to learn this topic on behavior science and how they can use behavior science to improve their workplace well-being, which includes not just, things like how you're feeling at work, but also your productivity, and so that you're able to be a little bit more focused. I'm just going to share my screen and get started. Just allow me a moment. Shubham, is my screen visible? We're good?
yes, it's visible.
Great. Awesome. Great. Quick agenda for today. I wanted to start off a little bit with explaining what behavior science is before we get into using behavior science for work. I feel a lot of insights on just understanding how our brain works can help us immensely when we start doing our work. I'll also share a few examples of how are different governments and different companies all over the world using behavior science, and then we'll get into some strategies for workplace as well. There are some readings that I have included, which I guess if you once we share this deck with you in the end, you can go over and look at things your own way. Right. So I'll quickly start off with an introduction of how we will run this 1 hour. Some session norms, I know. Please be fully present. Let's put away like some notifications from WhatsApp and email just for like an hour. At the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A. Please share questions. It will be really helpful for others as well once we share your questions. Some of the things that we learned today might be a little new. So I would be grateful if we're all open a little bit to challenging our beliefs, and that's something that will also get covered in our session today. And we are also comfortable to know that we probably won't cover everything, and that's fine, because the aim here is to learn a few things and then be able to use them effectively at our work. For today's session, we'll also be using Menti. I will be switching back and forth between this presentation and Menti from time to time. I request you to please, maybe on your cell phone, just open Menti and use this code. I haven't started sharing the questions yet, and when I do share the questions, you'll see the QR code and the code and this number again. But requesting you to just kind of keep that ready on your phone. And what I'm hoping some takeaways for today for everybody is that we go back with a little understanding of what behavior science is and how we can use behavior science in general to improve our decision making, whether it's at work or whether it's decision making with family, with friends, या फिर और भी कई कामों में हम every day we're making like so many decisions. How can we improve that entire process? And lastly, some strategies that we can use to improve not only our well-being at work, but also our colleagues' well-being at work. Great. So let's start with the first Menti question. What was your New Year resolution? I'm just going to share my screen again, if you guys can see it. If you can just quickly go on to Menti on the QR code. and see what your New Year resolution was. You can also see the code up here. It's 72464603 when you go on Menti. And if you can share, if any one of you had a New Year resolution, somebody has shared that their resolution was to give up non-veg. I'll give everybody a few seconds so that they can type in their response. And then let's see. वैसे हम मार्च में so I understand now इस time पे New Year resolutions शायद इतने important नहीं लगते. But please trust me, this is part of the process of what we'll do today. Start gymming. Yes, that is such a, who doesn't want to start exercising more? Reading books that I have collected so far. I also have a huge library of books जो मैंने पढ़ी नहीं है. Side में रखी हुई बहुत किताबें जो नहीं पढ़ी, but yes. It is my goal actually this year to read 17 books. I have thus far read only 3. Anyone else wants to share? Maybe I'll give everybody 30 seconds more. Start walking. Exercise एक और जरूरी part लग रहा है. Okay. I'm going to quit smoking, another very popular one. That's true. Let me move on to the next question. Are you still following your resolution? Yes, no, I did not have a resolution. Oh, great, somebody still is. That's fantastic. No, there are 2 people still following. That's great. Wow, this group is completely different than what I had imagined. There are a lot more people following their resolutions. That's fantastic, though. That's good to see. Okay, I'll probably, it's good to see that most of you are following your resolutions, but typically we've seen that this is a common area to joke. Yeah, I see three more. It's a common area that we struggle in, and if you've recently been to an airport, आपने देखा होगा कि काफी किताबें हैं that talk about changing your habits, that talk about improving your productivity, improving your focus, making better decisions. काफी hot topic है actually at this point. Behavior science के बारे में सीखना है. There are quite a few books. I recently was at the airport and मुझे एक fiction की किताब नहीं दिखी. It's mostly just non-fiction telling us how to improve. Okay, so I can see that most of you are still following your resolution. That's great. Let's just get into what is behavior science based on that. It's, of course, study of human behavior, which will include a lot of things. जिसमें होगा चीजें जैसे why don't people care about climate crisis? मैं gym क्यों नहीं जाती हूँ regularly? One question, that was one of the resolutions as well. I will start writing from tomorrow. If there are any creative people in the audience, if any of you have a goal to be more creative, write a little bit, that could be one of the things. How do I talk to my boss about a raise? Why do people behave in the way they do? Something that civil servants often are asking about, because a lot of the work is on behavior change for citizens. And how do we change people's behavior? So behavior science will look at all of these aspects. But in reality, it also is a more multidisciplinary subject that picks up learnings from economics. It has overlaps with psychology, anthropology, and also neuroscience. So you'll see behavior science sitting somewhere comfortably in between all of these subjects because it borrows from economics, it borrows from psychology, and all of these fields, depending on what your area of interest is. आप इनमें से किसी भी एरियाज में और डीप डाइव कर सकते हैं. If you're interested in how people make decisions in a group or in communities, or how do you change social norms, शायद आप anthropology में ज़्यादा emphasis देना चाहेंगे. If you're very interested in specifically learning about the brain and how it impacts behavior, you might be looking more at neuroscience. So behavior science is not just picking up insights from one subject. It's a very multidisciplinary field which has a lot of real life applications, not just in work, but also everyday just living. And I want us to kind of think a little bit now about, but what is the need for behavior science, right? हमने start किया था with the idea of like everybody has New Year's resolutions, right? People have different types of goals, and we take decisions every day about our goals every single second of our life, right? It can be something very simple as कि कल से अब जल्दी उठना start करना पड़ेगा, या फिर it's something very very common कि बस अब थोड़ा healthy खाना start करना चाहिए, या फिर no more smoking. We had one for quitting smoking as well, and that we should spend less money. We all have different goals in life, but I'm going to skip this one and go to the next slide. Everybody has different goals, but oftentimes we end up having the same reaction. I didn't wake up early because I didn't put an alarm. I didn't eat healthy because I can't control what I eat. I have no control. जब मैं एक समोसा देखती हूँ, I have to eat it. एक सिगरेट दिन का चलता है क्योंकि मैं कल से स्टॉप कर रही हूँ स्मोकिंग, या फिर एक नया आईफोन आया मार्केट में, you're like, I have to buy it. There is no reason. So in all cases, we saw that they were different goals, but in the end, we've had a similar kind of a reaction of dropping those goals. And why does that happen? Right? We think oftentimes that there is a very linear way in which we behave. Like एक हमारा intention होता है कि मेरा intention है कल से थोड़ा healthy खाने का, अब वो डायरेक्टली एक्शन में कन्वर्ट हो जाएगा. मैंने सोचा है कि मैं हेल्दी खाऊंगी कल से, और कल से ऑटोमेटिकली आई विल जस्ट बी ईटिंग हेल्दियर. समहाउ मैजिकली इट विल जस्ट हैपन. जो मैं 30 साल से नहीं कर पाई, सडनली अगले दिन वी कैन डू इट. सो वी थिंक इट्स एक्चुअली जस्ट अ लीनियर प्रोसेस कि एक इंटेंशन है विच लीड्स टू एन एक्शन, बट इन रियलिटी व्हाट हैपेंस इज नॉट अ स्ट्रेट लाइन, बट मोर लाइक जो शायद आपका गोल है शायद वो आपके लिए बहुत बोरिंग है. शायद हेल्दी खाना इज जस्ट टू बोरिंग, right? Maybe you believe that you have no self-control. Even if you try to eat healthy, you just won't be able to, and that's fine. Sometimes eating healthy is quite an inconvenience. कहाँ कौन बनाएगा खाना, कहाँ से लेके आएंगे सब्जी fresh, all of these things. या फिर आपको आता ही नहीं है शायद हेल्दी खाना बनाना, you don't know, and all of these are very real reasons जिसकी वजह से आपका action complete नहीं हुआ, right? And that's what behavior science really sort of is the most fundamental insight that I think in behavior science, is that often there is a gap between our intention and what we end up doing. There is an intention action gap. But we have, if a lot of you have done an economics class ever, there's a concept of rational human being in it, जिसमें dictate करते हैं that human beings always perform, or rather they take decisions for the betterment of their own selves. But in reality, when we are making decisions, there are broadly two areas or two things that influence us. One is how we think, how our brain is functioning, and second is our context, our surroundings. And I'll look into each of these aspects a little bit to kind of give you a glimpse into how people behave. So first, we'll start off with our own brain. And your brain is not for thinking. This is from a book by Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett, which is called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. I actually have it here right with me if any of you are interested in reading it. It's not a very fat book. सिर्फ I think 125 पन्ने हैं इसमें. This is a very important insight if you want to start understanding a little bit about how we make decisions and how others around us make decisions. Our brain's primary function is actually not to think. Our brain's primary function is to keep us alive. Thinking is just one of the many activities our brain is performing. And it's important for us to keep that in mind, that because our brain's primary function is to keep us alive, is to control and regulate energy throughout, like energy for eating, for exercise, making sure that we have the appropriate amount. Thinking is also an energy consuming exercise, therefore, for the brain. And so I'm going to quickly take some time and show you a very short video. इस वीडियो में आपको आई थिंक ये एक छोटा सा टेस्ट होगा. इट इज an attention test for all of us, where you have to count the balls that are passing between the people in white t-shirts. Okay, so it's only white t-shirts. I'll play the video, and it's only 30 seconds, so everybody please pay attention.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count?
Fantastic. So let's just quickly go on to the first question over here. How many passes did you guys guess between the white? Okay, we have something a little bit in the middle. Let's see what others are answering. I'll give everybody maybe a few minutes to kind of think through कितने लोगों से count हो पाए. Basically 0 से 30 के बीच में is approximately how many passes were done. Yes, roughly around teens में लग रहा है सबको. Mostly in the middle लग रहा है सबको. Okay, I'll give you the guys the answer. The correct answer is 15. But my next question is, how many of you saw the gorilla along with the? Okay, we have one person. I don't know, did a lot of what gorilla? There was, for people who are still wondering what this was about, there was a little bit of a gorilla action happening in the video. जब वो बीच में गिर रहे ball pass कर रहे थे, there was a man dressed as a gorilla, and I can see at least half of the audience, more than half of the audience, didn't notice it. Little bit of a trick. Most of you didn't. Okay, awesome. So I'll quickly explain why that happens, right? We all feel that our brain is so smart. We use it for everything. We use it to make all of our decisions. But our brain in reality has a lot of selective attention and perception. Because at the beginning of the video, we were given the instruction to count the passes between white t-shirts. Your brain automatically was just focused and zoned in on the task. And so anything that was coming and distracting you in between, your brain chose to selectively ignore it. And that's a very common thing because our brain there are ways in which it thinks more efficiently in order to conserve our energy. And broadly, when a lot of the early behavioral scientists started doing their work, you may have heard of this professor called Daniel Kahneman, who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. It won a Nobel Prize, and he passed away last year. But if you guys have an opportunity to read some of his work, it's very, very fascinating. He's actually one of the first psychologists to win, if I'm not wrong, a prize in economics. And he and his work and work of his colleagues highlighted that broadly, जो human brain में thinking process रहता है, वो दो type का होता है. One is system one thinking, and the second is system two thinking. And before I explain what these two types of thinking processes are, I want us to see the two systems as just metaphors. There are not actual like parts in the brain that just do system one or system two. It's just a way to explain the way the brain thinks. So system one is typically very fast, automatic almost. It's आपको कभी कभी फील ही नहीं होता that you're thinking about it, right? Everyday decisions, meeting में चाय लेनी है, कॉफी लेनी है, you always know what your preference is. कि मैं हमेशा चाय पीती हूँ, तो automatically I will pick up chai. That is a system one coming into place. It is error prone, but it's important because every day you don't want to spend 10-15 minutes thinking कि चाय पीऊंगी, कॉफी पीऊं या रहने ही दूं, right? Everyday decisions sometimes don't need you to put in that much effort. But system two thinking, which is more slow, it's a bit more deliberate. You think, you spend time, you are more consciously aware that you're thinking, you're looking at pros and cons. It's like applying your critical thinking skills. Is used more for complex decision making. Whether or not should I as a family take this loan up? अगर हम एक सरकार की पॉलिसी में भी काम कर रहे हैं तो इसमें बेनिफिशियरी का एलिजिबिलिटी क्राइटेरिया क्या होना चाहिए? All of these aspects require more deliberate, forceful thinking. This feels a little bit more reliable because you've put in effort, but as we go on to see a little bit more, we'll realize that our brain is by design a little bit error prone. So इससे हम आते हैं, what is the heuristic? You'll often hear about the term like जो आप कह रहे हो biased है. But what does that mean? What is a bias and how does it come up in the context of thinking? Heuristics are basically mental shortcuts जो हम सब लेते हैं, sometimes unconsciously, to take a decision. It's like a rule of thumb. So, for example, my rule of thumb could be that after 6 p.m. मैं चाय नहीं पीती या कॉफी भी नहीं पीऊंगी. So automatically, if I see कि 6:30 हो रहे चाय आई है, no, I will not have it. I don't need to think about it. I know it's after 6 p.m. Heuristics can lead to biases. They don't always lead to biases, but they can lead to biases. And having a heuristic is not a bad thing. It's the way the brain conserves energy. I have listed some common fallacies and some common sort of cognitive biases that end up happening and something that you might find in every day in your work context. Let's say the most common one is planning policy. Human beings tend to underestimate how much time it will take us to do a task. If you ever had to file your expenses or get reimbursements from after going on a work trip, I'm sure you understand the pain. You feel like it will 15 minutes में हो जाएगा, but actually में 15 में 1 घंटा लग जाता है. We also don't sometimes take into account कि मुझे reimbursement file करने के लिए और क्या-क्या चीजें करनी पड़ेंगी, right? And the reason why this happens is that by design, most people tend to be optimistic about their own abilities. कभी गाड़ी चलाते वक्त आपने देखा हो कि like हम हमेशा दूसरे ड्राइवर को criticize करते हैं, not realizing that we're also part of the drivers that are driving badly. So oftentimes we just have a tendency to underestimate. And there are some ways that we can, of course, combat these kind of fallacies that happen is keeping in mind how much time you've taken for a similar task before. राइट एक प्रोजेक्ट को छोटे छोटे टास्क में डिवाइड करके उसका फिर टाइम कैलकुलेट करना हैज अ मच मोर accurate result than looking at a big task completely, right? And imagine yourself doing this task. Where will I file my expenses? What do I need to file my expenses? All of these things can help you out. But before I continue, again, to emphasize, you cannot overcome your brain's biases. Some biases are there and it's very hard to overcome them. So along the lines of anchoring bias. Anchoring bias, you might have seen happen a lot that we decide very heavily based on जो हमें पहली information दिखाई गई है. We'll just anchor on it. हमें दिखाया गया था कि एक iPhone अगर 10,000 रुपए का है, तो we'll just stick to that. And then when you show me an iPhone that is a little less than 10,000, then I'll be like, अरे but ये तो 10,000 से तो सस्ता है. Not completely realizing that even the 9,000 probably is too expensive. But we are using that 10,000 as just one reference. Again, there are ways to overcome this, which is when you think of whether or not this anchor is correct. Like, so जब मैं phone का example use करती हूँ, क्या एक cost 10,000 रुपए होना भी चाहिए या नहीं? Then that helps you question your anchor in the first place. Confirmation bias, most common at work, and something that if you've done any amount of research, you may see that you have a tendency to do, which is basically our brain has a tendency to latch on to all of that information that we believe is true. So if I think, मुझे लगता है कि Earth is flat, तो जो भी मैं evidence देखूंगी in front of me, I will try, my brain will automatically latch on to that evidence that says कि हाँ, Earth actually में flat है. It's like that our reality gets a bit distorted, right? If we really cling on to our belief. And again, confirmation bias is a very, very strong cognitive process. There is a reason why our brain does this intentionally. It makes it easier. It reduces the burden of always trying to find hard evidence and always trying to do deliberate thinking. जहाँ अभी हमने system 1, system 2 की बात की थी, हमने discuss किया था कि system 2 is a lot more effortful. And so our brain will obviously try to save energy and try and look at that evidence easily जिससे prove हो जाए कि यार जो मैं सोच रही थी clearly वो correct है. And the most important way to come out of this bias is to just be aware that sometimes I will always look for evidence that confirm what I already know, right? I'll move on to the next one because I see like our time is also running up. Fundamental attribution error, again a very common one, जहाँ पे हमारी tendency होती है to assume that लोगों की जो personality traits हैं, that have more influence on their action than their context. For example, अगर आपका कोई colleague late आया office में, maybe you assume that they're just lazy, they can't come on time. But in reality, we don't know what all could have caused them to be delayed. No matter, and the big challenge with this is that we make incorrect assumptions then. If we all assume that certain types of people do certain things just because they're inherently like that, you are bound to make incorrect assumptions, right? The last one I want to quickly jump into is cognitive dissonance, which is basically a literal physical discomfort you might feel when your two or more beliefs are challenged or when you have conflicting beliefs. So, for example, if I like a cricketer and if I see him do something that I'm not happy with, like, for example, actually, I'll give a very real life example. I see Shah Rukh Khan, he's my favorite actor, but I see him do gutka ads and I don't like that. And that in itself is a conflicting belief. That's an actor that I look up to so much is doing something that I don't believe in. And this is a very real phenomenon that happens. There are physical signs of discomfort. You can feel anxiety. Your brain will actively avoid listening to any new information that is confirming that belief. You'll try and rationalize your behavior. Smoking में ये बहुत होता है, where we think कि अरे एक cigarette तो चलती है. It's not like कि मैं पूरा pack पी रही हूँ दिन में. But even if you hear that one cigarette is bad for you, your brain will rationalize it. अरे एक cigarette से क्या होता है? These are very common things that end up happening to us. Um, and I want us to kind of now think about ki, sure, all of this is true. Our brain does trick us. But at the same time, the context that we have makes a huge difference. And a lot of behavior science work actually focuses on the context of people because we can't change each other's brains. So jitna bhi behavior science ka kaam hai actually looks at the context. And context includes things like हमारे social norms and cultures क्या है. If my community and I have a certain belief that the earth is flat, then how will I change my belief? Everybody around me thinks the earth is flat and maybe it is flat. हमारा environment क्या है? You guys have seen that there is a climate module. I don't know if this is covered there, but climate has a lot of effect on your health. And there is documented evidence of how something like जब बहुत तेज गर्मी होती है, how much it affects your cognitive thinking. We know that pollution has impact on your health and which in turn will impact how you think. Things like framing. आपको ये information कैसे present करी गई है? Sometimes you may have seen milk cartons or like this dessert cartons जिसमें लिखा होता है 99% fat free. So that compared with 1% fat, there's a big difference in how that information is presented to you. And last is your emotional state. How are you feeling right now? If I've just had a fight with my boss and then you ask me to take an important decision, I'll probably not feel like it. It sounds a little irritating in all honesty. So all of these things plus our brain is how we end up taking decisions. It's incredibly complicated, but thankfully, a lot of science, behavior science, has been able to identify a lot of these common patterns, like the fallacies I just showed you, the heuristics that we take. These are all some of the things that behavior science has been able to uncover about ourselves. And जिसका application आप everyday life में भी कर सकते हैं when you're talking to your friends or your relatives, but also in your work life context. Just very quickly, I just want to bring it all together and show you, अगर हम कभी किसी के behavior के बारे में सोचते हैं, it's not just a personality thing. Where broadly we think about three things. अगर मुझे, if my goal is to swim every day, it's not just important कि मुझे swimming आनी चाहिए. What's also important कि मेरे घर के पास एक pool होना चाहिए. How will I go swim if there's no pool? And lastly, I have to be motivated to go swim. Just because I know how to swim and I have a pool nearby, it doesn't mean कि मैं जाऊंगी swimming करने. If मेरा motivation ही बहुत कम है. So whenever we are looking at breaking down a behavior, why people are not doing certain things, हम इस कॉम्बी मॉडल पे यूजुअली एक बिहेवियर को ब्रेक डाउन करते हैं कि आपके पास वो करने की क्षमता है, आपको करने का आपके पास वो मोटिवेशन है, क्या आप वो एक्टिविटी कर सकते हो. इफ आई वांट एवरीबडी टू नॉट लिटर, अगर मैं डस्टबिन ही नहीं दूंगी तो हाउ विल पीपल नॉट लिटर, राइट? सो इट्स टिपिकली दैट्स हाउ वी ब्रेक डाउन अ बिहेवियर. And before we get into the workplace one, I wanted to very quickly show you some of the examples of how around the world behavior science is being applied. Zomato, I don't know if आप लोगों ने कभी notice किया, Zomato has a default option to not select cutlery. This is their way of being more climate conscious. कि बार बार आपको select ना करना पड़े कि I don't want cutlery. They've automatically selected it for you. So that makes it easier for you. That's one extra decision your brain doesn't have to think about. कि हमें चाहिए cutlery नहीं चाहिए पता नहीं. It's already selected for you. It makes it easier. If some of you have come across Blue Smart, it's like Blue Smart is a Uber जैसे, but for e-cabs. And when Blue Smart actually launched in India around in Delhi, mostly when I was using it 23, 24, they have a very cool thing that they do. जब भी आप अपनी ब्लू स्मार्ट की एक राइड खत्म करते हैं, आपको एक ईमेल आता है जिसमें बताता है कि हाउ मच CO2 emissions you've saved on your ride. And that in itself makes you feel good. Ki, yeah, I did really good for the environment by taking this e-cab. I look at how much carbon emission I saved. This is something that's been behind their success, and there are a lot of that you can actually visualize how much impact you've created. Yes, this is a really interesting one to show. We were talking about anchoring, like just तरीके से आपको information present करी जाती है, that makes a huge difference as to how you make a decision. iPhones do this really often when they show the iPhones to you. They'll put the most expensive one first, so that आपको जितने भी iPhones साइड में दिखे वो आपको सस्ते लगेंगे comparison to the most expensive one. And rather than asking yourself, should I spend that much money on any iPhone? You end up asking yourself, अरे कौन सा iPhone हो जो थोड़ा सस्ता हो? This is a trick that they use very often. Similar thing the economists used to get subscriptions. You'll see 3 options subscription के लिए. एक online जो सबसे सस्ता है at $60. एक print subscription है जो $125 की है, और एक combined है print and web जो भी $125 का है. Here they have put the anchor in the middle. So you feel that अरे इससे तो better 125 का अगर हम ये print और वो लेंगे, at least we get a better deal. Whereas in reality, you're still spending $125. Did you really need to spend it? That's for you to decide. So these are just some tricks that, some behavioral things that companies use, but it's also being used by governments. So this is an example I wanted to show that the UK government used to improve tax compliance. Basically, what they did is that they had total of 3 different types of interventions. पहले एक ग्रुप को बताया गया था कि everybody in the country, like X percentage of people have already paid their tax. Then within the postcode, then within the town. The idea was to show that we really care about what others are doing around us. Because human beings are social people, a social context matters a lot to us. So अगर हमें लग रहा है कि अरे in my town, in my 10-kilometer radius, over 50% people have already paid tax. Maybe I should also pay it on time. And this is the impact they saw. अगर आप एक social norm set करते हैं for within the same town, that has more of an impact than at a national level. So something, maybe if anyone is in the income tax and they want to think about their messaging, tax season will come soon. Something to think about. Behavior science is also used to reduce water wastage in Brazil, where they send different types of, as you'll see on the right side, different types of messages were sent to people. Some send more deterrence की, like, अगर आपने पैसे नहीं दिए तो आपका नाम चला जाएगा credit bureau में. And then the other one was the social one, that majority of people pay their bill on time, don't be part of the minority. And that's the one that actually also kind of worked a little bit. So these are some of the ways in which behavior science can actually, and this is all very low cost, these are all low cost interventions. The tax one that I showed you, this was basically just एक छोटा modification किया था emails में. So the actual amount of money that gets spent is very, very little. You just modify some emails. But I see, and this is the last one, is in Norway, where they use behavioral insights for reducing road traffic incidents. But I see that, we're also like a little short on time. So I just want to quickly just jump on some limitations. It's not as if behavior science is foolproof. Like I said, most importantly, people's context really matters. All of the examples that I have shown you were actually targeting the environment around the people. So जैसे Zomato ने अगर अपने ऐप में चेंज किया तो उन्होंने ऐप में चेंज किया. They didn't make a change in me. It's just the environment that I'm interacting with became easier. Similarly, a lot of behavior science research, unfortunately, has been in what we call weird countries, which is Western, highly educated, industrialized, rich, and developed. Now, the challenge with that is while there are a lot of fundamental aspects of behavior science that are common, when you want to look at more social norms, it's harder to see how it makes a difference in one context and another. And so sadly, right now, a lot of research has not taken into account other types of countries. There are also obviously ethical concerns. Should we be interfering in the decisions people are making? Is that a right we have? And sometimes behavior is hard to measure. unless you are measuring an action that I do. If you're wanting to measure कि मेरे internally मेरे thought process में क्या change है, it's very hard to measure. So there are some challenges, but broadly, I think, okay, I think we can move on to the next one also. Like now, how do we use all of this at work? But before, how many of you were able to count these icons on the slides that I had put? This again is a little bit of a test of our selective attention. So how many brain icons did you guys count over the slides? I put quite a few small ones throughout. And the answer is somewhere between 0 to 20, just for reference. Yeah, so I think it's actually maybe a good thing if a lot of you didn't catch it. That means you guys are paying attention more on the slides than the... Okay. Now one response, somewhere a little under 10. A little bit higher. So in reality, I'll just quickly, I can see that most people probably didn't catch it, but we actually had 10 of these little brain icons that I had put before this slide. आपको मैं कभी दिखा देती हूँ, right over here. Again, an example of how our brain sometimes really confuses what we are seeing in front of us. So before I get into behavior science at work, that I think because for time, maybe my limitation is, there is a case study that I have included over here that how behavioral intervention helped out with 911 dispatches. Shubham, do we have the extra 10 minutes? Can I go over the case study?
Yes, Arushi, you can go. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. So I'll very quickly take you guys over it. Basically, for context, 911 is the US emergency number. And जब आप 911 call करते हैं, so it goes to a call center. Basically, they're called 911 dispatchers, जो decide करते हैं कि ambulance भेजनी है, police भेजनी है. They are the ones who send the help. They understand your situation, and then they send the help. So basically, they've been known to have a very high risk of burnout at work. The 911 dispatchers also resign often from work because they have to make very critical decisions within minutes. Literally life or death decisions they have to take within minutes, listening to the person on the phone. They also have to work very, very long hours. There's not a lot of breaks that they get. And they face a lot of emotional distress. But in the US, a lot of the support that is given to emergency responders like law enforcement officers or fire service officers, the same kind of response, the same kind of support, benefits, or recognition is not given to 911 dispatchers. If you've ever seen any sort of American context, fire safety officers are given a lot of there's a lot of respect that's associated with it. But the same is not for 911 dispatchers. So there is this, you can learn more about this study at the bottom. It's by the People Lab at the Harvard Kennedy School. They did a very short 6-week program with some 911 dispatchers in 9 cities. Basically, what they did is that certain 911 dispatchers got a very specific email. उनके email में उनको लिखा हुआ था कि there was a story that was shared from another 911 dispatcher, like some experience that they've had. And then the dispatchers were asked to also share some advice with their other colleagues. Basically, like, आपको ये कहानी पढ़ के कैसा लगा? Is there some positive experience that you want your other colleagues at 911 to also hear about? And this one small email, basically what it did is that it reduced burnout significantly amongst the 911 dispatchers. And within 4 months, there was a 50% drop in resignations amongst the 911 dispatchers who got the email that asked them to anonymously share advice with each other. And the reason why this worked is because this specific email targeted their dispatchers' sense of social support and belonging. On seeing these emails, they realized that there are other 911 dispatchers who care for them because their colleagues were sending anonymous advice. And it really felt like they belonged. It's a sense of feeling and support. And if you remember just in the beginning when we talked, um, I also highlighted that social context makes such a huge difference. People are also social creatures. And in fact, social norms have a huge role to play in how we make decisions. So knowing that other people care for us and they're supportive and we feel like we're part of a community actually helps in feeling a little bit more at ease at work. So this is just a quick short case study. If you guys want to, if any of you is interested in reading more, I've put the link at the bottom of the slide so you can go ahead and read the entire study. Um, I had a few polls planned, but I think just in the interest of time, I want to focus a little bit more on the strategies for that behavior science offers. So I think some common sources of frustration that we have at work, I've broadly broken them into three areas. One is fragmented attention that affects our productivity. कि जो टास्क मैं पहले आधे घंटे में कर लेती थी, अब मुझे उसके लिए 1 घंटा लग रहा है. Right? This could be because there's so much information overload, so much news coming at us, so much new information at at such fast speeds. We have a lot of notifications from our phone, whether it's email, it's NDTV, it's WhatsApp, so many notifications. We also do task switching, which is basically अगर मैं एक document पे काम कर रही हूँ dedicatedly, I move away for 5 seconds to look at my phone and then I come back. That's called task switching. And I think task switching has a huge impact. हमें लगता है कि 2 second phone में देख के वापस आने में it doesn't have a huge impact. But it actually does. It affects it reduces your productivity almost by 40%. That's been found in some studies. So multitasking, we all feel like we can multitask, but actually in reality, if कुछ important काम करने में अगर आप multitask करते हैं, you'll actually end up spending more time than it's needed. Inadequate recognition at work. Like I've said in the previous example as well, feeling undervalued or not receiving enough feedback on how you can improve has a huge impact on morale. And if you remember the combi model, motivation was a huge part of doing a behavior. If you want me to do well at my job, I need to feel motivated. And that's an important part of being able to do the job. I also should be given the right opportunities at work to be able to show what I can do. If there's a lack of respect, there's a lack of politeness, there's a lack of empathy and understanding our context, it has a huge effect in being in a workspace. Last was sludge, which is an interesting term coined by Cass Sunstein, who is another behavioral scientist. He has a book, I think, also called Sludge, which is basically we don't realize how very complicated processes affect our well-being. अगर मुझे एक reimbursement file करने के लिए 15 से 45 minutes बताने पड़ रहे हैं, it's going to irritate me because it means like कि मुझे अगर 50,000 का reimbursement लेना था, I would have put in so much effort. It just makes it feel not worth it, and then that affects me because I maybe don't get that benefit. So these are some of the things that make a huge difference. I wanted to now open it up a little bit and ask everybody what they think are some of the, if you can just go back to the mentee one last time. I have shared three aspects that are or that have broadly been known to affect workplace well-being. If there is anything else that you all want to add, please remember mentee is absolutely anonymous. If anybody feels a little uncomfortable in sharing, even I can't see who sent what answers. So if you want to just take a stab at, maybe we can wait for about 30, 40 seconds and see if there's any thoughts on what other
Hello?
aspects have affected. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, Mr.
No, he hasn't.
I'm guessing, is there my screen visible?
No, Arushi, you can go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, cool. So I want to see if anyone wants to add any other aspects that affect their happiness and well-being at work. I've listed some, but if there's something I've missed out, and there'll be many, like I said, I have only captured what my brain led me to thinking these are the reasons. There are some reasons that I may have missed out. Yes. Goes back to kind of people, recognition, yeah. It's important. And I think like a lot of times I feel कि हमें लगता है कि things like being kind at work or just being a little bit empathetic a lack of appreciation, these things make so much difference. It makes so much difference. We don't realize. And also, like, let's think about it. किसको काम करना है ऐसी जगह में जहाँ पे किसी की रिस्पेक्ट नहीं होती, जहाँ पे जाना एक दिक्कत फील होता है. So you want to be working at a place where you're respected, where you feel like you're doing something of value, and that value could be anything for anybody. Maybe I want to work in a place where I feel like I'm making an impact, and that impact could look, maybe it's for 5 people, maybe it's for 100 people, but that's important for me. None to less feedback. Yeah, feedback's so important, and a lot of us feel really scared about giving and receiving feedback. कि अरे किसी को बुरा ना लग जाए. But feedback देने का एक तरीका होता है. अगर आप किसी के, if you focus on how people can improve, and if you are able to tell people what they are doing well, people really do want to know. Great, thank you so much. I'll quickly move on to the next part of this, which is, now I've told you so many behavioral barriers. How do we start using some of these things at work or even in your personal life? So there is a very common framework we use, which is called FEAST. So FEAST is defined by Cass Sunstein, who's another behavioral scientist. And this is like a shortcut. Like I was talking about mental shortcuts. This is a similar mental shortcut called FEAST. जब भी आप किसी behavioral intervention को design करना चाहते हैं, there are 5 ways you can make it work. आप उसको fun बनाइए. If you make an activity fun, people want to do it. Right? So a lot of things get gamified, if you've noticed these days. किसी चीज को easy कर दीजिए. जैसे आपने देखा Zomato में उन्होंने default कर दिया about cutlery. Make it easy. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to do it. Last is attractive. Making something very obvious is going to make it work very much. Make it social. We talked about this. Social norms really affect how we want to behave. We want to believe that we are very individualistic people, but in reality, people are social beings. We need each other to thrive, but people also can also bring us down. So social norms, if you change norms, like you saw in the tax compliance, no, that's a simple thing they did. They changed this, they leveraged social norms. And lastly, make it timely. अगर दिक्कत ये है कि आपको याद नहीं रह पा रहा है कि ये चीज मुझे 4 बजे करनी है, put an alarm for it. As simple as that. And now, using some of these tips and tricks, I have listed some strategies for work that can help. And this sort of brings together everything that we've studied till now. The first one is what works for a good work environment: leader role models. When people in position of power demonstrate the same behavior that we want others to undertake, people will take it up. This is because we are social beings. We like to follow other people, but more importantly, we have a bias towards people in authority. So if somebody in authority is doing certain types of behavior, we have a tendency to copy it. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just what we do. So if we see our bosses, they are taking mental break. They are taking a little break in the middle. They talk about their own mental health challenges. They are being a little bit kinder. They're recognizing our work. We'll in turn try and copy it as well. Second is starting small. The most important thing that we've learned in the good important takeaway for you would be that changes should be smaller, right? The FEAST framework that I showed you talked about making things easy. If you make something new so difficult to do, nobody will want to do it, right? So for example, when you want to talk about mental health, it's very hard to talk about mental health. It's not something that's very commonly discussed in an Indian context, especially. तो इमीडिएटली अगर सबको एक कमरे में बिठा के बोले कि चलो बताओ आपको कैसा लग रहा है, यू फीलिंग डिप्रेस्ड और एंग्शियस, nobody is going to do it. It's so much. But if you make a small change where you just offer somebody, maybe this is a therapist I've been seeing, and you just share it with everybody. Nobody knows if you're going to take that in contact or not. It's just shared. So doing something small. Third, integrating anything seamlessly. Again, something that we saw in that FEAST framework. When we make something easy to do, then even something that's new, something that may be against our regularly held beliefs, we'll follow them because it's part of our existing routine. And lastly, appreciate your colleagues. We saw recognition and appreciation being a top concern even amongst us. Encouraging small positive interactions, like so having some of these appreciation rounds, it really does help. Sometimes I remember when I started doing some of these team activities, I would find them a little thoda odd lagta tha ki like, okay, why do I have to it feels a bit fake, it feels a bit forced. But there are a lot of strategies that have been created to do this in a way that feels a bit more authentic. My favorite activity actually to do this, and maybe something you guys can try in your offices after or before a meeting, takes 5 minutes, is everybody sitting on a table. You have one moderator. Everybody puts their head down, and then you ask um people to stand up. So if you were born on a Monday, everybody who's born on a Monday gets up. Everyone born on a Tuesday gets up. So on and so forth. We cover all the days of the week. And then they go around in a circle, and the moderator asks questions like tap the back of a person who you find very inspiring at work. And so your head is down, you feel a pat on your back, and you don't realize the kind of impact you're making. You feel like, oh, I think people see me as a hardworking person. But maybe people see you as an empathetic person. And that really breaks down these barriers of inauthenticity in some of these activities. So that's all that I have for now. I can see I have kind of exceeded my time a little bit, uh, but I wanted to kind of open the floor now for questions that can come, that you can scan the QR code and share with us. Anything else you want to add, Shubham?
No, yeah, I mean, Arushi, we can take up questions here. So everybody, if you want to ask any questions, please scan the QR code
Oh,
and
sorry.
share the
Give
questions
us.
with us. Let me
Very
see
good.
if we already have any. So one person is asking how to deal with sunk costs bias.
Uh, so the important thing with sunk cost bias actually is to recognize sunk cost bias. That's the biggest challenge we have, is that we don't recognize that it's happened. It's similar along the lines of confirmation bias, right? मैंने इतना पैसा खर्च कर दिया है इस activity में, I have to keep going. Actually, the best part is to recognize मैंने बहुत पैसा खर्च कर दिया, I need to step away. So, and the biggest or the most effective strategy for most cognitive biases is to recognize that it's happening. That's the first step. I'll give a quick example of a sunk cost bias is that maybe you've spent, 6 months reading a fat book, like Game of Thrones. You spent 6 months reading Game of Thrones. And now and you give up midway. Giving up actually is a sign that you have acknowledged your sunk cost bias and moved on.
Right. Okay, so the next question is, where can we find relevant case studies of behavioral science that worked in Indian policymaking context?
Great question. Sad answer is that there's not a lot yet. But there is, I do want to share that my organization has also helped create a portal called ABCD, which is the Atlas Behavior Chain Atlas. I'm forgetting the full name, but it's called ABCD. अगर आप Google करेंगे आपको मिल जाएगा. But in general, there are a lot of case studies you can find. I've given some examples at the end of my presentation. So when you're looking at the deck, you can find it. So ABCD is one example. There are a lot of firms like Final Mile, Dalberg Design that are doing work. They're not necessarily academic per se, but also UNICEF. UNICEF has a dedicated behavior science policy unit, and WHO. So both of these you can really, really leverage for things that are not just Western, but are more global in context.
So here I would also like to add, you can also go and visit Niti Aayog's Behavioral Insights Net. They also have a website you can visit there, and ABCD is basically Atlas for Behavioral Change in Development. So you can search for it and again go to the case studies. Does Swachh Bharat Mission also leverage behavioral science?
It does actually. I remember reading the guidelines for Swachh Bharat Mission Phase 2, if I remember. And they had some wonderful guidelines on how to leverage social norms and how to design sanitation mechanisms in such a way that people are able to dispose of their waste correctly. But as far as I understand, Swachh Bharat Mission is also deeply implemented by states. So broadly, central government to guidelines बना के देती है, but उसमें काफी I remember behavioral elements थे. I remember seeing it. Um, and again, I think the idea is a little bit to use some of these elements and design something that's very context specific. This context is important.
Right. Context is queen, content is king.
They both have to function together.
Right, right. So there's one more question coming. How can we use behavioral science to increase continuous learning habit among our employees?
Oh,
It's
great question.
very important. Yeah.
Wow, there's a lot of content on behavior science for learning. So I will at the outset say that अगर आपको सीखना है कि behavior science के tips क्या हो सकते हैं learning के लिए बहुत कुछ है. So couple of things that really help out. One, of course, is understanding कि learners को सीखना क्या है. If we start right from the beginning, what is it that they want to learn? If you look at a combi model, motivation is important, right? What is it that they want to learn? It has to be a mix between something that they find important and something that will help them at work. So finding that thing. And then second is making learning easier. So now if for example, if I have to do learning after office, it's unlikely I will pay attention because मेरा पूरा दिन चला गया office का. I've used my brain power already. Don't schedule it on a at the on a Monday. Don't schedule it on a learning platform that I cannot use. So these are some small ways to do it. If for a learner to make sure that they keep learning, an interesting experiment has been that when learners sit down and very clearly visualize and make a learning plan. Every Saturday from 9 to 12, I will study for 3 hours. And think about what problems will I face. Can I do this every Saturday really? And literally write it down. What problems can I anticipate? My biggest problem that I can see learning on Saturday from 9 to 12 for me would be कि शायद मैं सुबह उठ ही नहीं पाऊंगी. या शायद I want to go meet my parents, I want to meet my friends. So weekend for me would become a really bad idea. But I know weekdays for me would work. So it's really about thinking through कि अगर मुझे पढ़ाई करनी है तो मैं कब करूंगी, कैसे करूंगी और क्या दिक्कतें आ सकती हैं. These are some things that we have to really think about because like we saw, intention और action के बीच में बहुत बड़ा gap आ जाता है. So that gap we have to focus on.
Right, right. Absolutely. So there's one more question that has come up. How can we leverage behavioral science to manage our seniors as well as our juniors?
Oh, my favorite question. So I think the biggest takeaway from behavior science, I think for me, and I hope for a lot of you, should be that we're all error prone, right? And it really makes a difference आप किसी को एक piece of information कैसे present करते हैं. So now that you know that your boss, for example, likes to see information in a bulleted list, you want to show it to them in a bulleted list. It makes a difference also in terms of your juniors. You would want to understand what is it that they're struggling with, right? And I think most important thing oftentimes is that you've seen aspects of cognitive biases that I've talked about, cognitive dissonance. You might see this a lot in your bosses where they are very clinging on to their belief that ऐसे ही होता है. Like अगर एक तरीका है काम करने का, that is the only way we will do it. The ways to change that belief is, of course, to let the other person see their own bias. If I can tell you the things that won't work. It will not work to shame your junior into doing work. It's never going to work. Shame is the worst tool for compliance. It never works. It only causes fear. Other thing is that definitely doesn't work is to put arbitrary deadlines for people. It doesn't work. It only creates stress. You want people to feel motivated to do things. You don't want them to feel harder. Other things that you want to build and bring into your relationship with your colleagues is making things easier for everybody. Right? If you are telling your junior, if you're giving them some काम to do जिसको उसको करने में इतना time लगेगा, इतना manual काम है, think about it. How can I make it easier for them? I think these are some of the ways. There's a lot on behavior science and improving employee well-being engagement. And a lot of it also has to go back to just being a little bit empathetic. Think of the position your boss also is in. Think of the challenges they are facing. Their boss also has a boss. Your boss has a boss who's forcing them to do certain things, and that is coming out on you. How can you sort of be a bit more empathetic in that situation and understand them? Similarly, for your junior, what is it the barriers that they are facing that maybe I'm not seeing right now, but is there in something that they're facing? If I'm being angry with my colleague, or if I'm being angry with my junior for being late to work, there's thousands of reasons this can happen. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Right. It's very important to think from others' perspective, get in their
Yeah.
shoes and think like why they are behaving a certain way.
Yeah. And we just
So,
saw that our brain actually is not that reliable as we think it is, right? It's not
mhm,
that reliable. But there are ways in which you can, and I also want to say that a lot of behavior scientists who have done this work for decades, even they struggle to manage their cognitive biases. Like confirmation bias जो हमने देखा है कि हम उसी information के पास जाते हैं जो हमें पहले पता है. A lot of people struggle with it. Even knowing that this is something that happens, so many people in academia continue to struggle with this. So be a little nicer also to yourself कि just because हमें पता है कि ये होता है, इसका ये मतलब नहीं immediately सब solve हो जाएगा. It means that you have to be a bit more aware, but know that even knowledge is not going to solve it.
right. Okay, so let's take the next question. Can we get a basic course on how to integrate behavioral science with policy making?
Yes, there are quite a few courses online. Even if you don't want to do it just for policy making, there are some on just behavior science as well. I know Ashoka University, I think, has one on behavior science in general. Coursera, EDX, all of them have several courses. I think I am Ahmedabad, if I'm not wrong, has one on policy making as well. IIT Delhi, if I'm not wrong, also has one on designing. If you go on to universities like Stanford, MIT, and Harvard as well, they're also looking at policy making and behavioral insights. If you want to learn from other organizations that have done this work, OECD does a lot of this work. There is the UK that has a behavioral insights team. There is an organization called BIT, Behavioral Insights Team, that also does this. I've also attached some resources at the end of this presentation. The OECD, for example, has a website where they collate all of the public sector applications of behavior science across the world. So it'll include not just Western countries, but it'll include non-Western countries as well. So I've again linked that at the end of this.
Right, right. Thank you so much, Arushi, for all these references. Also, learners, you can also check out on iGot itself. We have a few courses in behavioral science from Fractal,
Fantastic. Oh,
and we are,
fantastic. Strongly recommend Fractal, actually. Their
yes,
courses are quite good, yeah.
right. And we are anyways expanding our library to even more, bringing on more courses on behavioral science, maybe from Dalberg as well. So
Oh,
let's
yeah,
see.
who knows? Actually, if Fractal course is by Biju Dominic, if that's the individual, you should also read what they write
Yes.
on Live Mint. They write a lot of articles on behavior and on in Mint. You should, if you're able to get a chance. Very, very smart, very good articulation. And I'll just yeah. Any other questions? Do you have any more questions to go over?
Okay, let me see. Can we have another Karmyogi Talks webinar on behavioral science in coming days, focusing on actionable policymaking use cases?
That is
Okay, we
that one is
can.
for
Let me
you.
answer it first. We can definitely.
That's great. People are looking forward to it.
So, yeah. Okay, there's one feedback. These courses provide foundational knowledge in behavioral science and are designed to enhance personal and professional effectiveness. Thank you for taking the session.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I think we can wrap up now. Thank you so
Awesome.
much, Arushi. Thank you so much for taking this wonderful session on behavioral science. It was really insightful and
Thank you for having me.
it was a Saturday morning well spent.
Yeah, thank you. I also had a great time. I'll share this presentation with you. I've added some resources at the end if people want to go over. This is the hub I was telling you about, OECD Hub. the People Lab at Harvard. People Lab at Harvard specifically focuses at public sector employee well-being. So if you want to look at and get some ideas for, they have a lot of studies going on for correctional officers and how to keep their motivation up, etc. And my favorite, of course, resource is 100 books on behavioral science. At whatever level you are at, whatever your interest is in behavior science, this resource has everything. If you want to build basics, if you want to look more at psychology, if you want to look more at social norms, all of it's covered over here. And what I'll do, one thing maybe, Shubham, is I'll add some resources, Indian resources in behavior science and policy, and share this with you.
Okay, sure, definitely. We can share it with our learners for further readings on behavioral science. I think there's also one website called Inside BE for behavioral science.
Yes.
So
yes, Decision Lab, Inside D. There's so many. You can आप कभी Google करेंगे, you'll find a lot of resources. I think the challenge is to find authentic and like high quality resources. And thankfully, a lot of behavior science tests happen through RCTs, randomized control trials. I don't know if that's something that's covered in the sessions, but so that's why the quality of tests are usually quite high. But yeah, happy to add some extra resources.
Right, sure. Thank you so much, Arushi. It was
Thank you,
pleasure
everyone.
having you with us. And
Awesome.
all the learners, you can wait for our next session. It will, so one session is already ongoing, maintenance and transformers. So if anybody is interested, you can switch to that session. And we have one more session on resilient tourism infrastructure for Andaman and Nicobar Island that is scheduled at 3 p.m. by former HOD and Dean of School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. So thank you all for joining. Thank you so much, Arushi, for taking the session.
Thank you. Good luck, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.